welcome to our second session of our Healthy Oceans, Healthy Minds talk. My name is Karina and I'm Projects and Events Officer at Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful.
I'll unmute myself. I'm Nicola. I'm the Community Development Officer at Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, and me and Karina both work together on the Live Here, Love Here team.
Thanks, Nicola. Firstly, we'd like to say a massive thank you to our funders, Ocean Conservancy, who have been really supportive through our whole planning stages. And thanks, Sarah, for actually joining the call this evening. Ocean Conservancy are an international conservation body, and we're the national coordinators for them here in Northern Ireland. We'll stick a bit more in the chat about them so you can find out a bit more about them yourselves. We are delighted you're able to join us tonight for this session of talks called In at the Deep End. We are very aware that Zoom fatigue is a thing, so thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. And this will be recorded after, so if you've anybody who wasn't able to join today, that will be up on our YouTube page afterwards. We'll be hearing from some wonderful people throughout this series, immersed in nature, health, resilience and communities, all connected by their love of the outdoors and the impact it has on them and their work.
So through the campaign, we really want to reconnect people to our seas and waterways and outdoor spaces, and to show the impact that a healthy river and marine environment can have on our health and well-being, and how it can help us create a society that values the outdoors and all the benefits that it can bring. So, well, that's a bit of an introduction of why we're here. So I just want to maybe point out that this is only our second session, so we're still very much finding our feet. And we'll hope that you find this valuable and worthwhile, and if not, I hope you find it entertaining as well. We're just going to cover a few Zoom rules, and again, as I say, we're trying to find our feet, so us finding the mute and unmute button kind of doesn't really always work the way we want it to. So as Karina mentioned, we're recording this session, and we've set it up to record just to be on speaker mode. So then whoever is presenting or speaking will be the main person that's on the video. But again, we would like you to, you can feel free to keep your cameras on if you want to keep it on throughout the session, or if you want to turn it off, that's no problem. And if you don't want to appear on camera at all, again, please do just turn it off. And as we're working through the sessions, you can plug any questions that you have in using the chat function. So there is the chat function, and then we will want to have a bit of a conversation style discussion towards the end and after the presentation. So again, this is an opportunity where you can use the little raise your hand function, or give us a wee wave if you do want to ask any questions or any comments that you have on camera, or else also if you want to chat add any questions into the chat box as well. So hopefully that's covered all the domestic rules and everything. Yeah, if you have any technical issues as well, throw them into the box and we'll try to figure it out as we work our way through. So I'll hand back over to Karina. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola. So today we are speaking to Mark and Christine from the Rivers Trust, and they're going to talk to us a bit more about their work and what they do, and have been doing over the past number of years to connect people through their rivers work. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, I've found the unmute button, so that's good. Good start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful for inviting myself and Christine to give the seminar this evening. My name is Mark Horton. I'm the All-Ireland Director for the Rivers Trust. The Rivers Trust is a charity based in England, but supporting rivers trusts across England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Ireland. There is a sister organisation in Scotland called Fisheries Management Scotland, and there are a number of rivers trusts there as well. Rivers trusts are all independently run charities, and the Rivers Trust, the umbrella body, supports all of those trusts on the ground. So it does get a little bit confusing, but apart from being the All-Ireland Director of the Rivers Trust, I'm also the Chief Executive of Ballinderry Rivers Trust in Northern Ireland, and it's that trust that I'm going to talk about this evening. And then following me will be Christine Colvin, who is the Director for Partnerships and Communications at the Rivers Trust. And she's going to give us a very insightful talk into the work she did previously with WWF on rivers and with communities in South Africa. So I'm going to try and keep to time, hopefully. But the purpose of both of our talks this evening is to show how communities, even when they're in the most difficult of situations and in communities that are being disrupted by civil unrest and social upheaval, that through all of that people can come together for a common purpose and help not just heal the environment but also heal the communities that they're a part of as well. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. And if you can see my screen, somebody give me a thumbs up so I know that you can see it. Yeah, good stuff. Okay. So this introduction is about Ballinderry Rivers Trust. So Ballinderry Rivers Trust, as I said, is a charity based in Cookstown, but looks after and is concerned with the conservation and protection of the entire Ballinderry River system, which is on the western side of Lough Neagh. Also all of the western shore streams of Lough Neagh as well, that you can see there in light green, and Lough Neagh itself. And Lough Neagh is the largest freshwater lake in these islands. It's about 1,000 square kilometres of mid-Ulster that Ballinderry Rivers Trust is interested in. And although it is, I suppose, a relatively small river catchment in terms of a European context, there is enough waterways in the Ballinderry, if you join them end to end, to flow from its source in Camlock in the Sperrin Mountains all the way to London in the south of England. So it's a relatively small area with an awful lot of water in it. And as a charity, we are concerned with protecting and improving the water quality of the rivers and streams in that area, also improving the habitat for all of the wildlife that depends on the rivers and the lakes. We also conserve the freshwater species within those catchments, and we run conservation breeding programs as well as in-river restoration works. We run education and outreach programs, which brings the community together to learn about their role in protecting water and also how important the water environment is. And we also work very closely with our universities and research institutions across Northern Ireland and beyond to further everyone's understanding of how to protect and improve our precious freshwater resources. And the Ballinderry River is a globally important river, even though it's a very local passion for us. But the upper reaches of the river are a special area of conservation and an area of special scientific interest, because we have populations of the globally endangered freshwater pearl mussel. We have good populations of otters, and also a plant called streamwater crowfoot, which is a very important European freshwater habitat. Now, we are one, as I said, of many rivers trusts across the UK and Ireland, and the Rivers Trust is the umbrella body for all of these local trusts, and you can see the red circle sitting around the Ballinderry there in the middle of Northern Ireland. And Ballinderry Rivers Trust has been on quite a long and unique journey, which I'll set out for you now. But just in the context of the Rivers Trusts generally, the Rivers Trust, before it was known as the Rivers Trust, was the Association of Rivers Trusts and was founded in 2001. And it actually came out of the formation of West Country Rivers Trust in 1995, but also a number of other rivers trusts in England. And once there were 2 or 3 set up, they decided to form an association. But maybe little did they know that in the early 1980s, another association or kind of prototype rivers trust had established already in Northern Ireland in some of the most unique circumstances. So I have to take you back to Northern Ireland in the 1980s. Northern Ireland at that time was gripped in the Troubles. There was just devastation really across the communities in Northern Ireland. People who maybe would have once socialised together and spent time together and worked together were now divided by political and social unrest. And in fact, one of the people who works still at Ballinderry Rivers Trust was a shirt maker in the 1980s in a shirt making factory, and has recalled to me relatives of people that he had worked with who were injured or killed in incidents that were happening at that time, and the real kind of unrest and unease that caused even in the work environment, where friends who were maybe, familiar with each other for a long time started to look at each other with suspicion because they were from different parts of the community. So Northern Ireland really was in the grip of the Troubles, and the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 was still a long way away in 1984, and at that time would have been really unimaginable. Similarly, though, at that time, the rivers in Northern Ireland were being severely impacted by pollution. And in 1984, this photograph shows pig slurry flowing down the Ballinderry River, or a tributary of it, and the impact that that was having on water quality. And fish kills were very common at that time. And this is a photograph of a past chairman of Ballinderry Rivers Trust, Leo Cassidy, standing on the banks of the Ballinderry River at Ballinderry Bridge with piles of dead pike and dead trout that have been pulled out of the Ballinderry River after agricultural pollution incident. And headlines such as this, pollution blights angling paradise and pollution plague, were very common in the press at that time around what was happening in the Ballinderry River. And if you look closely at some of these reports, you can see even here in this one case, they believed that hundreds of pike were killed and over 140,000 young salmon that had previously been released to the Ballinderry River to try to rectify the damage done by a previous pollution incident. So the community were really struggling at that time to protect the river. But because it was the height of the Troubles, different parts of the river were segregated. So the bottom part of the river would have predominantly been fished by people of the nationalist Catholic background. The middle parts of the river were fished by people from the Unionist Protestant background. And those angling clubs didn't mix, and they didn't go into each other's territories on the river. So in the same way the community was divided, the river was divided along the same lines. But this really came to a head when the Ballinderry River was hit by a series of succession of pollution incidents that virtually wiped out the native dolphin trout population in the Ballinderry River. And in 1984, a meeting was called, and these angling groups, who normally wouldn't have met with each other or socialised with each other, came together in the Royal Hotel in Cookstown to meet to discuss what they were going to do about the impact on the river and how they could save this river from the pollution blight. And maybe very forward thinking, you'll see that they actually decided to call the organisation the Ballinderry River Enhancement Trust, but they actually decided to drop the word trust and become association. But from that day on the 11th of May 1984, the association was formed. They decided to hold a raffle. They raised some money. They bought some salmon from a salmon station in Bushmills, and they started to restock the river. And so these anglers who normally wouldn't have worked with each other were working together to put their fish out into the river and to try and save the fish populations in the Ballinderry. And all of a sudden, the headlines started to change. So now we have fish being released to the river to save the Ballinderry River, and a plan being devised to protect the river. And this plan was devised by the local community, by these anglers and other members of the community that were coming together. And their plan was to establish a fish hatchery to breed fish of their own, but also to establish a river school. And to undertake work with the wider community and with businesses and with farmers to see what they could do to reduce the amount of pollution getting into the Ballinderry River. And so over the years, the community around the Ballinderry River Enhancement Association grew, and more people took interest in the work that was going on. And this photograph, although it may seem fairly insignificant, actually is a very powerful photograph, because in this photo we have councillors from what was Cookstown District Council at the time, from Sinn Féin, from the DUP, from all the political parties who normally wouldn't have been seen together. But the Ballinderry River Enhancement Association managed to get their wellies on them, get them into the river, and they had their photograph taken showing their support for the work that the community was doing. And slowly but surely, they saved up the money to buy a porter cabin to establish their first river school that they could bring children to learn about the river. and then got the funding to build their own building, purpose-built, with an office space upstairs, a river school downstairs, and a fish breeding centre out the back of the building. And the early river school was a classroom full of posters that children were brought round and explained about the importance of the river, and then we would have brought trays of bugs into the river school for the children to look at and learn about the river environment. And a walkway was created right up around the back of the office and the breeding centre into a glen, so that the children could walk up over the waterfall and learn about the story of water. So from 1984, when the establishment of when the association was established, it wasn't until 2006 that they decided to apply for charitable status and join the Association of Rivers Trusts. And in 2011, the association changed its name to Ballinderry Rivers Trust. Well, from 2006 to 2012, we actually delivered a project with WWF. And this was a really big project for us. It was about bringing the community together to revisit the plan that had been started back in the 1980s and to actually create a new plan for the river that would fit with the brand new and sparkling Water Framework Directive that everyone was talking about. And one of the things about the Water Framework Directive, this European piece of legislation to protect rivers, was that it wanted to place the community at the heart of protecting the river environment. So the Trust set about bringing together the community to develop its own vision for the river and its own action plan for the river. And over 300 people contributed to the development of that plan. And I think, you know, from 1984 to 2006, that was a testament of how successful the association and then the Trust had been in terms of bringing together the community from all different sides of the community in the Ballinderry to work together to protect the river into the future. And their visions of wanting better access along the river, a better understanding of the river, a cleaner river, and more wildlife in and along the river was realised through over 100 actions in the plan that the community themselves adopted. And those people were called Ripple Champions who drove those actions forward. And many of those actions are still being delivered today. So what does the Trust look like today in 2020? Well, we've gone from a volunteer-led, community-established association to a charity with a good, sound team of staff and also 10 very dedicated trustees. Some of those are actually the founding members of the organisation from 1984. So it's really good to have them still involved in the management of the organisation. And we also provide an awful lot of volunteering opportunities, and the volunteering actually contributes an awful lot to the work we do. I should have put the most recent figures on there, but even in 2017-18, 115 volunteers contributed 1,762 hours of time. And all of those volunteers are obviously gaining skills that help themselves, but also help the Trust as well. So today we continue as a community to look after the fishery of the river. We undertake surveys to look at the health of the fish populations and learn more about the pressures that our fisheries are under and how we can resolve those pressures. We also undertake a lot of habitat improvement work for trout and for salmon. And to date, we've restored over 40 kilometres of river habitat for our native trout and salmon. And all of these projects involve the community helping to deliver. So it's not just the team that deliver these projects, it's our community volunteers as well. Everything from creating new spawning habitat for fish to opening up sections of the river that have been overgrown by invasive species or creating new nursery habitat for fish. We do a lot of work to identify the pressures that still are placed on our water environment. And these can be walkover surveys where volunteers in the community and from the angling clubs help us to identify the pollution pressures from agriculture, from septic tanks. But we also have people working with us on GIS projects that help us to identify these pressures using more technical methods, such as modelling using data that's available to us. But one of the projects that we had most success with has been the Ballinderry Riverfly Monitoring Initiative, where volunteers are trained to go out on a monthly basis. They do a kick sample in the river, they collect the wee bugs that live under the stones in the water environment, and they score them on the bank because these bugs can tell us how clean or dirty the water is. When they get a score, they send it back to the Trust, and that can indicate to us whether the stream is still in healthy condition or not. And if the river fly life has been impacted somehow, we go back with the volunteer to try and understand what the problem is and to resolve the problem, and work with the people who are maybe causing the problem to put that issue right. And we're working an awful lot with our farming community, and our farming community are key to what we do in the Ballinderry. We're using quite innovative techniques to help our farming community have less of an impact on the river environment. And what's really special, I think, about the longevity of how long Ballinderry Rivers Trust has been there is that we're working with generations of farming families. Some of the farmers today in the Ballinderry River visited the Portakabin as children when they came on a trip from their local school to learn about the Ballinderry River. And now their children are coming to our river school and doing education programs with us. So we're working across 2 or 3 generations in families, all helping to protect the Ballinderry River. We're also running a number of breeding programs, and again, this couldn't happen without the help of our local community. We run breeding programs for freshwater pearl mussel, which is a globally endangered species, and the Ballinderry is one of only 6 rivers in Northern Ireland still to have them. Bearing in mind this was a community-started initiative, and the community is still very much at the heart of what we do, we established Europe's first successful breeding program for freshwater pearl mussel, and we're now running Europe's largest reintroduction program to try and help save the species from extinction in the river. And we've actually managed to release enough young mussels now to increase the population of the remaining mussels by 153%. So this is a conservation program supported by and helped run by the community. If these were white rhinos or Bengal tigers, I think people would be jumping up and down a bit more excited. I know freshwater mussels aren't cute and furry, and the fact that they don't have eyes doesn't help either. But still, they're very important to us, and the community recognise the importance of them and what they signify in terms of the health of their local freshwater environment. We also run breeding programs and reintroduction programs for white-clawed crayfish, which is another globally endangered species. And we have established Ireland's first ark site for white-clawed crayfish in the middle of a working sandpit. A lot of the work we do is around habitat restoration. And again, we've worked with over 80 landowners to try and protect the river so that these mussels and the fish and the crayfish can survive in the river environment. This work is supported by the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, who have been a long-standing funder of this work. But again, it's about bringing community members together, landowners, people who can deliver the services to put up fencing, to deliver agricultural services, who perhaps normally wouldn't have worked with each other in the past, but through this project are being brought together to help protect this freshwater pearl mussel population. And finally, I think what's important about what we're doing and what overarches everything we do is education. And our river school has evolved from the Portakabin and even from the classroom with the posters that I just showed you to a very interactive learning space that community groups and children under normal circumstances without COVID can come along and learn about the water environment. And so we have community groups who use our river school as a meeting space, not even necessarily for meetings about the river, but for about their own community activities. So our office and our river school has actually provided a resource to the community to come together and meet and pursue their hobbies and interests through our facilities that we can lend to them. But we also, as well as having river school to teach children in, we have a program of outdoor learning, using the river as an outdoor classroom and getting children to come out and learn about the freshwater environment whilst they get their hands and their feet wet at the same time. And it kind of brings me back to where we started, because children in Northern Ireland are the future. And there is huge moves ahead now to bring together schools from different parts of our community. So although we have still a segregated education system with Catholic maintained and state maintained schools and integrated schools in the middle, there aren't always the opportunities for those children to mix outside of their communities or to work with others from different backgrounds and perspectives. And through the Education Department's shared education programme, we've been able to facilitate projects that bring those schools together and bring those children together. And it's the river that's doing that. So just as the river brought the community together in 1984, it continues to do it today. And these children get their own little trout hatchery in the classroom. They hatch the trout, They talk to their neighbouring schools and share their stories about what they're learning about the fish and about the river. And then they get on the bus together as two schools from different communities, and they go to the river to release their fish and to learn about the freshwater environment on the banks of their local river. So through shared education, we're paving the way for a shared future and a better river environment. And so I think it's with great pride that as a community, we can say that these headlines, pollution plague, are no longer the norm. And it's more the case that we see headlines like this, an endangered species protected by Cookstown landowners. And I think that's a fantastic story to tell. And we've had the great opportunity to do it, not just this evening, but through being lucky enough to be on Countryfile and various other programs. So about 13.5 million people have seen the work that we're doing, but we don't seem to tell enough people about it often enough, and we need to get better at doing that. So this is a great opportunity to do it. And I just want to finish by saying that you have to remember that everything I've just said was all started over 35 years ago, in the middle of a community in complete turmoil, and with a community that was also divided. But they came together for a common purpose, and that common purpose was to save the river, save the creatures in it, and have a river to enjoy for future generations. So I'll leave you with this final thought from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you very much.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for that overview and complete talk about how the community has been involved from the beginning, and it really has been the community that's driven the change. It was really inspiring. Thank you very much. Well, if anyone does have any questions, we would still really like to keep them towards the end of the session, whenever we will open up to a little bit more discussion. So I think now, if Christine is ready, we'll hear about her story from a very different part of the world. So we'll pass over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Just trying to run there we go. Yes, so I'm going to bring you a very similar story in many ways, but from the other side of the planet, from South Africa. I lived in South Africa for 25 years, and for the last nearly 9 years that I was living there, up until the beginning of this year, I was working with WWF on their freshwater program in South Africa. So I'm going to share with you a couple of stories of the communities that we worked with there, and often also under very difficult circumstances. The cover of this Time magazine pictures South Africa, sadly the most unequal country in the world. It still is. And this is a scene in Johannesburg, which is very typical of a lot of South African cities, where you have shanty towns, people living a very hand-to-mouth existence in homes they've built themselves, next to much more luxurious and stable housing. So a very typical scene in South Africa. And the photographer who took this photograph, obviously using a drone, Johnny Miller, joined us on a couple of our journeys of water in South Africa, and I'll share some more of his imagery a little bit more into the talk. So for those of you who don't know South Africa very well, I feel as though I'm going to focus on a lot of the negative aspects. And I have to say up front, it is one of, if not the most beautiful country in the world, a wonderful place with wonderful people and very, very deep-seated structural problems and challenges that it's dealing with. So it is the most unequal country in the world. It has the highest Gini coefficient at 62%. And just for comparison, in the UK, that's 34%. It also has the largest population of HIV positive adults in the world. 1 in 5 adults in South Africa is HIV positive at reproductive age, against a global average of less than 1%. So we completely failed to get on top of the AIDS pandemic when it was a pandemic, and it's still an epidemic in South Africa. We also have a very high murder rate, and it's still a country very much at war with itself. And I think that that's only getting more difficult with the impact of the global recession, and youth unemployment is more than 50% at the moment. So all the conservation work that happens in South Africa has a very strong focus on creating opportunities for youth, trying to look at job creation, livelihood and income creation. And of course, the inequity is also felt through the services that people receive. Fewer than half of the households in South Africa have piped treated water into the house, and 1 in 10 people are still getting completely untreated water from local rivers or wetlands or springs. So that's just to kind of bring your head into the South African picture and understand some of the challenges that we were up against and that all local communities are facing and having to deal with on a daily basis. It really is a country of extremes. It's a drought-stricken country. Much of the country is semi-arid, and the farmers in South Africa will always tell you that if the droughts don't get you, then the floods will. Even in the drought-stricken areas, we still get floods. So yeah, we have all the challenges to deal with. And when I was with WWF in South Africa, we focused on the water source areas of South Africa. So as well as being unequal in terms of income, South Africa is also very unequal in terms of rainfall. And the coloured areas in this map are the water source areas. They're essentially the high mountainous areas that receive the very high rainfall. And from only 10% of that land area, half of the river runoff of the country is generated. So as a conservation organisation, we decided that if we could look after the landscapes in these areas, this is where we would get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of the water returns on investment for the rest of the country and for everybody downstream in a water scarce society and a water scarce economy. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of examples of some of the work that we did with local communities, just a very brief overview. I'm going to start off in my old hometown of Stellenbosch, which is down in the Cape, in the southwest of the country, and then also talk about some examples around the mountain kingdom of Lesotho, where we see these sort of blue and purple areas and the orange area of the Eastern Cape Drakensberg. I'll talk about some of the landscapes and communities that we worked with there. And some of the symptoms of problems in the water source areas could be seen in these very sediment-laden brown rivers. This is in the Eastern Cape, a very, very turbid river, which is really as a result of degradation of the catchment and topsoil being washed off as areas are being overgrazed. And a critical problem in many parts of the country was alien invasive vegetation, particularly plants that have been brought in by the forestry sector, pines and eucalypts, really useful for building, but invaded many of the natural areas outside of the plantations and completely dried up some catchments. So these were some of the kind of symptoms of the problems that we were dealing with. But some of those underlying root causes are very common in catchments around the world. So in the work that I'm now seeing with the Rivers Trust throughout the UK and Ireland, a lot of these issues are ubiquitous. Pollution, catchment degradation, over-abstraction of water, overgrazing, and of course climate change, something that we're all confronted with. So all of this has resulted in a water governance crisis. And because social governance is at the heart of the problem that we're trying to tackle, then people have to be at the heart of the solution as well. And something that we initiated and helped to support in South Africa was the development of these water source partnerships, because community-based partnerships are much more resilient. They're obviously locally based. They bring in the public sector, private sector, local businesses, national businesses, and sometimes international businesses as well, to help build the local institutions and resources that are necessary to turn around the state of the catchment. So I think, again, a lot of commonality between what's happening in developing countries like South Africa and developed countries and here in Europe as well. So the first story touches on my old hometown of Stellenbosch, which is a beautiful town, lovely place to live, makes great wine. Highly recommend going there and drinking the wine from there. And this is the face of Stellenbosch that all of the tourists want to see and see. And it really is a lovely place. But running right through the center of the town was really almost a dirty secret in Stellenbosch, which was not a secret in the scientific community. And that was the heavily, heavily polluted river, which presented a problem for all of these farmers downstream of the town. And the pollution came from the other side of Stellenbosch. This is still Stellenbosch, but this is not the Stellenbosch that you'll see advertised in the tourist brochures. This is the township of Stellenbosch. So in that Time magazine front cover, the township area where people often live in their own home-built houses frequently don't have toilets inside the houses. So they'll be relying on shared toilets like this one with T35. You know, that'll indicate the zone of shacks that it's serving and might be shared by between 20 and 40 families using one toilet. Shared washing areas, shared taps with no proper drainage, and definitely no functioning drainage for the roads and paths in between the shacks, as well as very infrequent and inadequate rubbish collection services. So all of this adds up to really, really poor living conditions, unhealthy living conditions for families who are there. And a lot of what happens in the township inevitably ends up in the river and starts affecting everybody downstream, including the businesses and irrigation farmers downstream. So, you know, rivers always run through the problems and the so-called problem shed within the watershed, and they often collect and concentrate those issues within the problem shed, but they can help to bring to light some solutions as well. So something that we got involved in was the Stellenbosch River Collaborative, which was set up initially between these organizations, the local municipality, Stellenbosch municipality, two big wine farms, big wine companies in the town, the university, WWF, and the Nedbank Green Trust. And we came together to start funding, resourcing, and exploring some of the solutions for the town and what we could start to implement on the ground at the local scale. So of course, the first step is that you kind of need to bring people together, and nowhere better than on a riverbank and in the shade of a tree. And the lady speaking from beneath the tree here, standing in the river, Sharon Murray, put a lot of effort and hard work into bringing a whole lot of different elements of this very divided community together, so often divided along economic grounds, racial grounds, and at very different levels of education as well. Another lady from the university who had highlighted the really high pollution levels, and then somebody from the other side of the tracks, one of initially our volunteers and then a woman who was employed by the project. They came up with their own branding. The township area is called Enkanini, and they called themselves the Enkanini Water Hustlers, because they were going to hustle to get stuff done. And what they wanted to do is actually just written across her bottom there, and it says changing the flow. So that's what they wanted to do, change the flow of how things were going in their community. And some of these drains were built, collecting some of the runoff. That's still treating, you know, some of the products of the problem, but more importantly, getting the communities to come together, testing new technologies, new sanitation options, and bringing new services which they could manage and maintain themselves and which wouldn't be resulting in so much pollution. And there's a guy, the tall guy with dreadlocks here standing in this picture. His name's Ayanda, and Stellenbosch is in the Western Cape, and Ayanda came from KwaZulu-Natal. You might have heard of a city called Durban, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. And he had worked in a similar community-based group. So one of the things that we were able to do was put these community groups from opposite ends of the country in touch with each other to help them to learn really quickly from each other. And what worked in one community could often be translated to another. And Ayanda's in this picture as well. He's holding this turbidity tube here. This is in his home region of KwaZulu-Natal. And again, in another township area, where we were supporting another local group that was working in the community here. And we've been very involved in the Rivers Trust recently, looking at combined sewer overflows and when they're overspilling and polluting our rivers, running a campaign to come together for rivers and end sewage pollution. Well, this is not an overflow, but this is an effluent pipe at a water treatment works in KwaZulu-Natal. And when you first look at this picture, I think that the challenges that are faced, particularly by this local lady who lives here, seem completely overwhelming. Again, you know, the same problems of no litter collection, rubbish building up, the wastewater treatment plant wasn't well managed, and intermittently effluent was released that was of very poor quality. But this lady played a really important role within the local community in doing some very basic monitoring of the effluent, testing the turbidity, reporting that quality into a central, a local NGO, but in the town. So she was sort of the first eyes on the ground to see when problems were happening, and could help to hold to account some of the local authorities, bring a much higher level of visibility, accountability, and transparency into what was happening around water management in that area. And although you know, her own situation looks pretty desperate there, this was a job that she could do, you know, close to home in her community, and helping to be part of the solution as well. And I think in rural areas, you know, collaboration looks pretty much the same the world over. So here we have a group who were working in a rural area in the Southern Cape on catchment management again, working with local farmers, trying to get access to their farm to clear the alien plants out that have been drying up streams in the area. And of course, most local collaboration, especially with farmers, requires a lot of cups of tea and coffee, and a lot of biscuits before it can really get off the ground. But this is actually a wonderful picture for South Africa, because we have Roseanne, the young Black woman who's sitting here at the farmer's table, she was the driving force in this traditionally very white agricultural community. But the work that she was a real driving force behind managed to clear 900 hectares of alien trees. And of course, we have to measure everything in days of employment with such high youth unemployment. She helped to create 22,000 person days of employment, and that clearing and that work resulted in an extra 1 billion litres of water being available in that catchment every year. So some really great success stories from these rural areas as well. But I think, you know, because we've been focusing on areas that are very challenging and where there's conflict, where there are deep divisions, I don't want to, you know, share the stories with you through rose-tinted glasses and say it was all good news. All we've got to do is come together and have a couple of biscuits. It really doesn't work like that all the time. There were many failures along the way as well. This is the end of a day on one of our wonderful journeys of water, where we came up into a water source area, brought some local celebrities and sports people and influencers, as well as business people, to see the water source area, see where their water comes from. And we had kicked off earlier in the day with the photographer, Johnny Miller, from Unequal Scenes, with his drone, and set off after a bit of a celebration to kick off. And we heard a disturbance behind us, which was, we hadn't realized because we were over the hill, but Johnny sent his drone back, and we could see these 6 busloads of protesters coming to the point that we had just left from. And they were there to counter protest against us. We were trying to draw attention to a new coal mine that was going to be in this very sensitive water area. And we were protesting against the coal mine. These people were brought in to protest against us, protesting against the coal mine. And they were saying, we want the jobs. You know, conservation is for rich people. We need mines because mines bring jobs. And that's still a real point of contention in South Africa, and real conflict. Sadly, only 2 weeks ago, an anti-mining activist was murdered in KwaZulu-Natal in her home, shot dead by 4 gunmen. So these kind of conflicts are real, they're still happening, they involve a lot of money and a lot of power. And as environmental practitioners, you know, we shouldn't forget that we work in the real world. So a final glimpse of a really beautiful part of the country. This is Matatiele, on the foothills of the Lesotho Mountains in the Eastern Cape. Really beautiful work going on here. So just to end on a kind of high note, rather than the more conflicted areas. So Matatiele is in a water source area, a source of water, beautiful grazing and grass for the livestock, mainly cattle, a little bit of goats that live there, and the fabulous people that live in the villages of the Eastern Cape that create their livelihoods out of this landscape. But the alien invasive trees present a real challenge. They're threatening water security, so threatening water quantity and quality, reducing the amount of grazing available, affecting the quality of the beef, and also affecting how the rangeland is then managed. So we supported some local groups again in terms of alien clearing, then doing something productive with the biomass, the chopped down trees, creating charcoal kilns, and giving them some additional training in rangeland management. So how to manage the cattle, reduce the carrying capacity so that they weren't compromising the catchment. We also enabled cattle auctions to happen, which meant that there was a much shorter supply chain to market. And these guys could make a lot more money out of the cattle that they were raising. So the ones who were kind of following the program of alien clearing and good rangeland management then had access to the cattle auctions. And we were also able to put in some spring protection so that people were no longer sharing their water sources directly with livestock in that area. And although I must say, since I've been at the Rivers Trust, it seems that most of the trusts seem to be kicked off by, you know, 3 men in a pub, normally with an interest in fishing and a love of fish and salmon, maybe more than people. But in South Africa, the story seems to be it's always 2 or 3 women getting it together and saying, you know, we're going to stop this here and we're going to turn it around. And so these are some of those fabulous women, Nikki McLeod and Sissy Matela, and the local chief as well, who worked really closely with them. And yes, in South Africa, some of the chiefs are women, very highly respected within the traditional authorities. And I loved Mark's quote that he had, and it's really nice to share this one with you to end it on, from Africa, from another environmental activist, Wangari Maathai from Kenya, and talking about the impact of coming together and working as a community to start fixing up our environment, because normally our environment's only broken because we are, or our society is. So yeah, I really love her quote that we are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process we heal our own. So thanks very much to Karina and Nicola for giving us the chance to talk to you this evening.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was amazing from both of you. Thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. It's really interesting to hear how those rivers and communities have come together for something that they value, and they see the benefits of it. And it's been really great to hear that something that happens in Northern Ireland, like there's situations that happen all across the world, and it's all because of people coming together that we can make change. So it's been really interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, totally agree with that, Karina. It's like really inspiring that like the communities made these things happen, and yeah, and it's just kind of makes you think of like, you know, what else communities are making happen out there as well. Well, now we want to kind of like open the floor up to you. So if you have time to stay on, I know we're maybe at our limit, but we'd really love to have a bit of discussion if you would like to join in a bit of chat. If you would like to ask any questions on camera, there is a little like a raise your hand function, or else if you want to just give us a little wave, and if your camera's on, we will look out for you. Some really nice comments coming through. Some people do have to go on. Ian Humphreys, he popped on to join the session this evening. Thank you, Ian. And yeah, so he's really enjoyed the talks.
Mark and Christine, it's only our first session, so it's only natural that we forgot. But one question that we're asking all of our speakers is, what's your relationship? This Healthy Oceans, Healthy Minds campaign is all about developing people's relationships with the coast and the outdoors and our waterways, and creating that value behind it as well. So we just want to ask you, what is your relationship with the coast and waterways?
I give way to Christine first.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up loving sailing and loving the ocean. Of course, having the pleasure to have lived in South Africa for the last 25 years. I also had kids who kind of, I think one of them's got webbed toes because he spent more of his childhood in the ocean surfing than he did on dry land. But interestingly, from a career perspective, I first got involved in water when I went to the desert, and I volunteered to go to the Kalahari Desert and discovered the amazing difference that having access to groundwater could make to communities there. So as a geologist, finding something that you could finally do with geology that didn't result in dragging coal or oil out of the ground was a great revelation. And so I've then kind of crawled my way back up to the surface from underground. Thanks, Mark.
And Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, my first real recollection of a light bulb moment with rivers was actually at primary school. So I mean, most of you will have guessed I'm not originally from Northern Ireland. I'm from Dudley in the West Midlands in England. Very built up urban area. Most of the rivers are buried underground. You don't see them. But I was lucky enough to have grandparents that would take us out at the weekends in the car to the countryside. But I remember at primary school, we learned about the River Stour and where the River Stour starts and how it joins the River Severn. And we were took on a field trip on a bus, and we went to different places along the Stour, and we saw it coming out as a trickle in the Clent Hills, and then all the way down to the bottom where it joined the River Severn, just this big river joining another river. And it just blew me away, the idea that water could collect and grow and move in the landscape the way it does. And really that was where I was hooked. Just, I find that, you know, when you need a bit of headspace, I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about here today, going to the beach or walking along the river is one of the most fantastic places to be. The sound of the water, the sound of the trees if it's by the river, the wind, you know, the fresh air, it's healing. I think it really is fantastic. And I enjoy my job as much as my job can be stressful. So rivers can be stressful. I find that going and walking along the river puts you back in the right place again. So I have a working relationship and a love affair with rivers. Let's just put it that way.
That's brilliant. It's really nice. If anyone, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? No, one that I am thinking of is, right, okay, we're in 2020, life has just kind of gone to Zoom. So how has COVID like impacted the work that you are doing, and like are you using like, you know, things like Zoom sessions to stay connected with the communities that you are engaging with? Who wants to go first?
You want to go first, Mark?
Go on ahead, Christine.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. You know, we're all feeling a little bit isolated and zoomed out, but at the same time, you know, it's kind of leveled who we have access to. So for some organizations, I think especially like the Rivers Trust, where we're spread all around the country, now nobody's expecting you to jump in a car and come and have a face-to-face meeting. The expectation is that you will all talk remotely. So it can actually open up more access to people in different places that you wouldn't necessarily have met, but it's can be hard going. And yeah, I kind of miss getting my feet and hands dirty and being out doing more in the field as well. But I think Mark's teams have managed to carry on pretty well. Hey, Mark.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey this year. You know, we've had to review obviously the way we do things, and I think from a river management point of view and having meetings with people who need to talk about managing rivers, that's all changed. You know, it's all on Zoom. You're not traveling about as much. But in terms of the work that we do as a Rivers Trust, very little has changed. We stopped going out into the field when the pandemic initially hit, and everybody really just pulled their horns in and stopped doing everything. But, you know, we quickly realized that the farming community hadn't stopped. You know, they were out working, tractors were still driving along the roads, food still had to be produced and put on the shelves. And, you know, our rivers are still flowing and we can still go out and engage with these people. So we actually very quickly put in place measures that would allow us to still go out and work with the community at a distance, but, you know, still on a face-to-face basis and a one-to-one basis. And that's proved very, very powerful. And one thing that's come out in terms of our work is the sheer delight that people got when we contacted them to say we might come down to the farm and still walk the fields and try and control some of the invasive plants along the river. Because I think they were just happy to see someone. So, you know, we have to remember that we're all still human and we need human contact. And what better place to do it, as I've said, along the river, in the fresh air, with all the right social distancing in place. We can still meet and do things, we just have to do it slightly differently.
Yeah, but we definitely do. And yeah, this is one of our versions of doing things differently. So again, I think at this stage, we will just say a big massive thank you to both Mark and Christine, and to all of you participants as well who gave up your evening to join us. So thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much for the stories that you were able to tell of the different communities that you're engaging with. And we really hope that everybody was able to enjoy this evening. And we do still have lots more talks lined up. We've got some more webinars and sessions running right through until the 4th of December. So if you do want to engage in anything more, like all the information is online and on our Live Here, Love Here Facebook page. And yeah, so we'd love to see all of you again. And again, thank you very much. We'll be making the presentation, the recording of it available on our YouTube page over the next few days. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.